Me lagi talaga yung Maya. Oo, it's okay.
Yo lo puse GUI.
Sí, got it.
All right, YouTube is just loading up. There we go. We'll give it a second for others to log in. I know it takes a while for people to catch up to the technology. I definitely don't want to start too prematurely because the first section can be a little complicated. That's why we put it off from last week. Well, and also because it's rather long and I didn't want to start something we couldn't finish. I know it can be difficult enough to carry the ideas from one part of the Mishnah to its conclusion, but splitting it up over a week is just asking for a lot. All right, that's 7:01. I think that the YouTube is up and running. I think we can go ahead and get down to work. So good evening to everyone and welcome to our final Mishnah study of 5782. This is the last Mishnah we'll study this year. And as we talked about last week, we will resume following Simchat Torah. My brain just froze. I believe that's the 19th is when we're going to, yes, on the 19th of October is when we will resume. So we get a little bit of a break because there is so much else to fill our spiritual life with. And we need to make sure we make time for the special mood of this season. All right, with that housekeeping out of the way, let's take care of chapter 3, Mishnah number 1. And as we're going to see straight off the bat, we are dealing with an unusual situation, which will highlight the differences between this impurity of the hands and every other form of impurity that we find in the Torah. If a person puts his hands inside a house with scale disease, his hands have first degree uncleanness, the words of Rabbi Akiva. All right, so much to unpack here. So first of all, what is this scale disease, this nega, this sara'at? This is the illness that often gets translated incorrectly as leprosy. And it is an illness that does not afflict us anymore. But in the Torah, in the sections of Vayikra, Leviticus, it discusses the ritual impurity that comes with somebody who is afflicted by this disease. And in general, we have a principle that if a person is in the house while someone else has this condition, that they become ritually impure. The person themselves with the affliction is what's considered an av tuma, the highest level, the generator of impurity, and other things become a first degree of uncleanness, of ritual impurity. Now, under normal circumstances, the body of a person, the actual person, will only become ritually impure if their head and the majority of their torso is inside the house. So if you just poke your head through the tent flap and you say, "Hi, Bob, how are you doing?" you do not become ritually impure. However, when it comes to the impurity of hands, it does not follow the general rules of the impurity of the body. Again and again and again, I will repeat, the rules that are for the impurity of the hands are different than the rules for the impurity of the body as laid out in the Torah. So here comes our debate. Rabbi Akiva says, just putting your hands into that house through the tent flaps, whatever, means that the hands are now considered to have a first degree of uncleanness, which will affect, and someday we'll study this in detail, what they could in turn cause to also become ritually impure from lower levels. But the sages say his hands have second degree uncleanness, which is a level beneath, and a level which has very limited effect upon other things. Now, clearly they are disagreeing. Rabbi Akiva is saying that your hands should take on the same status as the body would were it actually put into the house properly. And the rabbis are saying, no, this is not following the same rules that a body would. This can follow a separate set of rules, and it only has this second degree of uncleanness. Aaron, you have your hand up.
Yes, Rabbi. Just out of curiosity, that disease, Sarat, is that a spiritual disease or a physical disease?
It is a spiritual affliction which has a physical manifestation.
Thanks. That was my understanding too.
Good. And one that is not treatable by medicine. And if somebody is sick with an illness that needs medicine, they go to the doctor, not to the Kohen Gadol, not to the high priest. And if someone has Sarat, after it's been properly identified, then yes, they would go to the Kohen Gadol rather than to a doctor. But that is it's a very unique illness, which is why it has this unique issue with impurity. Just as a reminder, especially as was very important to remember when COVID began, this is not about physical uncleanness. This is about a spiritual blockage. And as such, the rules for dealing with it are different than the rules for dealing with a medical condition or issues of hygiene or infectious disease. So we shouldn't consider somebody who is ill with a disease as unclean from a ritual point of view, but we absolutely should follow whatever is the best instructions for preventing the spread of a disease when it's a normal medical condition. All right, so that is the first disagreement. Second disagreement, whoever defiles garments. So this is a category of person, a person who is capable of causing the ritual impurity of a garment. This might be classically a zav or zava, a person who has had a untimely discharge from their generative organs. They then have a status of uncleanness that if they touch other garments, that they will cause it to become also a lower level impure. So under such a circumstance, if that kind of person is involved at the time when he touches the uncleanness, he defiles hands so that they have first degree uncleanness, the words of Rabbi Akiva. But the sages say such that they have second degree of uncleanness. So the hands that come into contact with this, Rabbi Akiva believes that they follow the general rule that would be the case for a body, or rather for a garment, and have first degree. But the sages say, no, the rules for the hands are different because we're the ones making them, and it is only a second degree of uncleanness. Now, we're going to get a little bit of discussion going on in our next paragraph. They said to Rabbi Akiva, where do you find anywhere that hands have first degree uncleanness? So they're asking for a citation. Prove to us that this is the proper rule. Prove to us that this is the proper decision. He said to them, but how is it possible for them to become unclean with first degree uncleanness without the whole body becoming unclean? Only in these cases can they have the first degree uncleanness. So he is responding by saying, yes, you're right. There isn't a normal logic or proof text to follow this, but there has to be something where the hands can become unclean within the first degree of uncleanness. And in such a case where the body would not become unclean, but the hands do. And this is those cases. For those of you that are wondering, because I know there's always people interested in keeping score, Rabbi Akiva does not win this argument. The opinion follows the Hachamim, follows the general sages. Yes, Aaron.
Hey, Rabbi, if the Zavahat makes you unclean somehow, is that second degree for the whole body, or is it because the Zavahat is the father of uncleanliness, so what it makes impure would have first degree of impurity, right?
So under normal circumstances, it would be first degree, but it gets complicated, and I don't want to get into it, but yes. But what they're talking about here is a case where they weren't made bodily ritually impure, but only the hands would be considered ritually impure. And they're trying to figure out if it wasn't a situation where the entire body has contracted the ritual impurity as the normal variety as discussed in the Torah, then what happens if only the hands are in a position to become ritually impure, but not in that normal way that the Torah discusses? And that's what they're arguing about.
But all right, how do you skip the first degree of impurity then?
Well, because the rabbis are saying that's not the one. Right? It's in these cases, in the first and second case, the person would normally have not become ritually impure at all, zero. Right? If they become ritually impure, like you walk into the room where there's somebody with sarat or a dead body, then you're ritually impure. Done. Right? Hands, toes, knees, everything in between. But if you just put your hands into that tent flap or through the window, well, normally nothing would have happened. There would be no ritual impurity at all, according to the Torah. But the rabbis have instituted, and we will talk about that later tonight, they're the institution of this. The rabbis have instituted that it will cause some level of ritual impurity. And now the rabbis are just arguing about how much. And it does not need to follow the same pattern as would be the pattern if it was the full body. Right. Again, this is not a subset of the rules of ritual impurity from the Torah. This is its own unique thing.
Right. No, I get it's not a subset. I was just wondering, because every time they talk about impurity, from the father of impurity comes first degree of impurity, and then from first degree of impurity comes second degree. And here is the only time I've seen where they skip one of those levels. Because
this isn't playing by those rules. It's a different set of rules here, and the rabbis are okay with that. I mean, you can also just imagine, if I would hypothesize a practical implication, that if you were to treat the ritual impurity of the hands exactly the same as the impurity of the body, and with exactly the same strictness, then you would be creating a much higher barrier and a much greater opportunity for failure and a much greater opportunity for transgression. That more things would become defiled by the hands that had been rendered under these rules. And as such, more people would be violating the rules of ritual impurity for the hands, and you would be just multiplying the opportunity for transgression. And the rabbis, by and large, did not like to do that. They wanted to make sure that their rules would be followed and not become a burden, but also not be ignored.
Right. But if they wanted to, I was just wondering about the, we'll use the phrase, the method to the madness. Obviously, if they wanted to be lenient, they could just say the hands don't contract impurity.
Well, no, but so they are already strict by making the hands contract anything at all. And now they are being lenient, if you like, to use that term, by saying to what degree do they contract under those rules. It's like if you've already decided you are going to you've already decided you're only going to wear white socks for the rest of your life, you took that on for yourself. And if you decide that it doesn't have to be brand spanking new bleached white socks, but a little bit of dirt and muck is okay, that's not crazy or ruining the rule. That's you being lenient upon a stringency that you already invented. There's no one to come along and tell you you're doing it wrong, because it was your decision to do it in the first place. Natan, I think I see your hand up. Natan? Maybe you're still muted there.
Yeah, I forgot the mute. Question, Rabbi. I missed the beginning because someone entered and started talking to me, okay? What was the issue of the hands, that the differentiation between the cleanness, the level of cleanliness? Can you please summarize like in 30 seconds? Because I'm a little lost now.
You never want to give a rabbi a chance to teach something again, because, well, we will. Okay, so we're
30
getting
seconds, that's okay.
I know, we're getting a very clear difference here. If you have a tzara'at, the leprosy type disease, and somebody goes into the house, then they contract impurity. But with hands, if the hands go into the house, technically, according to the Torah, nothing happens. But the rabbis have decided something will happen. Rabbi Akiva believes that it becomes first degree, which is one level down. But the sages say, no, it is second degree rather than first. So the argument is, why are the rabbis, or the discussion that Aaron was having and what we're arguing about between the sages and Rabbi Akiva is how much impurity should a person get for the hands when their body itself is not actually doing what is necessary to create bodily impurity according to the Torah.
So what is the practical difference in the level of impurity of the hands?
Of what else? So if it's a first degree uncleanness, then when you touch other things, and it gets complicated, but touching many other things will create impurity for those other things. And then they can become impure themselves or transmit to other things. So the rabbis are very much limiting the impurity of the hands such that it basically stops where they are. And Rabbi Akiva wants to give it a higher level, which means it does have the chance to contaminate more.
So the rabbi tried to avoid making the life easier for everyone, saying that the level of
if we're looking
will be lower.
If we're looking for motivation, one option would be that they want to make sure that it's not going to cause too many things to become unclean. And that may be because they want to make life easy, or it might be because they know that if they make the decree too strict, people will ignore it. And as a general rule, the rabbis have as a principle that you should not make an edict that is so strict that the majority of the community cannot observe it. Because if you do, they won't. And if they don't, then you've made a mockery of not only the rabbis, but also of the idea of observance. And that will then have knock-on effects that if they get into the habit of ignoring the words of the rabbis, they'll also ignore the words of the Torah.
Thank you so much, Rabbi, for the summary.
No problem. And I think I went over 30, but I hope you forgive me. All right. So second half of Mishnah 1 here. Like I said, it's a long one. This is the right place. Yes. Food and vessels which have been defiled by liquids convey second degree of uncleanness to the hands. The words of Rabbi Joshua. But the sages say that which has been defiled by a father of uncleanness, that's the highest level, conveys uncleanness to the hands, but that which has been defiled by an offspring of uncleanness does not defile the hands. So they are making a distinction. Rabbi Joshua just wants to say, if something has been defiled by liquids, then it does a second degree of uncleanness. The rabbis are saying, no, if it is defiled by the highest level of uncleanness, then it creates the impurity on the hands. But if it has been defiled by something lesser, then it doesn't defile the hands at all. So again, they are in a way being more lenient here. Now, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is going to say, it happened that a certain woman came before my father and said to him. So we get an actual maaseh, an actual story that happened. My hands went into the airspace inside an earthenware vessel. He said to her, my daughter, what was the cause of uncleanness? But I did not hear what she said to him. So Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel has an incomplete story about something that happened with his father. So he's saying, look, I remember my dad talking to this woman, and she said she had reached into the earthenware vessel, not touched it, but gone past the opening of the pot, and she wants to know if her hands had become ritually impure and to what degree. And what he remembers is that her father asked what it was that had caused the uncleanness to the pot. So therefore, the thing that causes the uncleanness must matter. And the sages said, the matter is clear. That which has been defiled by a father of uncleanness conveys uncleanness to the hands, but that which has been rendered unclean by an offspring of uncleanness does not defile the hands. So the rabbis are saying, aha, Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's father proves it. That story proves it because he was actually asking about what caused the uncleanness. If he was following the same position as Rabbi Joshua, then it wouldn't matter what had done the uncleanliness, what had caused the impurity. If it's impure, it's impure. But if he asked what caused it, then it must matter. And that means your father agreed with our opinion, and that is the settlement to the argument. So sometimes, even if you don't have all the information, parts of the discussion can be very helpful for figuring out the rule.
So, Rabbi,
Yes.
then with regards to the hands, if the hands with first degree of uncleanliness don't spread on uncleanliness, what's the difference between first and second degree?
So there are certain circumstances where it can happen. And I'm afraid without really going into the full chart of how ritual impurity works, I don't really want to dive into that because it's very hard to do with just words. So another time, maybe after we finish Beitza, we'll do one of the impurity sections, or maybe we'll just do a quick break and look through Mishnah Torah or something, because it's just too hard to lay out without having all the text clear in front of people. It's a very complicated system. All right. Now, if you thought what we've discussed so far has been a little odd, you ain't seen nothing yet. Because if you're not familiar with the idea of what we're about to see, then it may sound a little surprising, because we've talked about dead bodies and creepy crawly sheretzin. We've talked about tzara'at and all of these cases of ritual impurity, azav and zava, all sorts of things. Well, guess what else causes impurity of the hands? The Torah, the physical scroll of the Torah, the actual Sifrei Kodesh, the holy books, the Tanakh, the Torah. They also cause ritual impurity of the hands. If you are, carrying a Torah, if you are holding on to the scroll, then your hands are ritually impure, and you would need to go through Netilat Yadayim before you ate something that required ritual purity before eating. Now, why? Why is this the case? What is going on? Well, we talked about this a little bit at the beginning of our class on Yadayim when we first started. But as Dr. Kulp explains here, the traditional explanation is that people would often put the truma, things that needed ritual purity to eat, near the same shelves where they would keep their Sifrei Kodesh, their holy books. And because the food and the books were nearby, mice would come and they would eat from the food, and they would also eat the books. To keep people from storing those together and thus protect the books, they put a rule that the holy books would render your hands impure, and thus, of course, you can't eat the truma. So it's better to just keep them in two separate places, and that is like a Tupperware container to preserve the books. Now, is that the only explanation that we can come up? Well, maybe. Dr. Kulp puts on another explanation from modern scholarship, but which is a little bit convoluted as well. I don't want to go into it, but I'll leave it on the screen for those who would like to read it. My own sense, and that which was shared to me by some of my professors, is more on the idea that having the Sifrei Kodesh, the holy books, cause ritual impurity to the hands, made people take them more seriously. That because people often were willing to follow the ritual purity laws, but that didn't mean that they were always being super careful with other acts of respect or kavod, of honor for other things. By making the Torah scrolls cause ritual impurity, people came to be more careful around them. They treated them with more respect, because they were an object that should not be casually handled. They shouldn't just be, picked up and thrown on your kitchen table. They needed to be handled carefully, which was an equivalent of respectfully. And by having these rules, that made a difference. Now, how does that go into practice? Well, let's get to the actual Mishnah. Anything which disqualifies truma defiles hands with a second degree of uncleanness. So this is sort of the general rule that if it would make truma ritually impure, then anything would get a second degree of uncleanness. Now, this happens to be Rabbi Joshua's opinion, and the sages don't exactly agree on this. One unwashed hand defiles the other hand, the words of Rabbi Joshua. But the sages say that which has a second degree of uncleanness cannot convey second degree uncleanness. So again, Rabbi Joshua is being consistent, but the sages are trying to also be consistent and say, no, if you touch something with one hand and it became ritually impure, that hand does not make the second hand ritually impure, because second degree cannot make second degree hand uncleanness. Yes, Aaron.
So is this saying how do they know that the hand's second degree? Is it saying it's impossible for the hands to have first degree?
It is by rabbinic fiat, right? They know that it has second degree because that is what they have instituted. It's, how do you know the speed limit is 55? Because that's what the sign says.
Right. So they're basically saying that hands cannot take on first degree of impurity then, right?
By themselves, no. Of course, if the body is ritually impure altogether, then it follows that same rules, which is why, thank you for the segue, he said to them, but do not the holy scriptures, which have second degree of uncleanness, defile the hands, right? I don't know, when I read Tanakh and I talk about, and it talks about ritual impurity, it seems that second degree of uncleanness will work. In fact, we've already made a position that the Sifrei Kodesh, the holy books, which have only a second degree of uncleanness, we've already made a position that they'll defile the hands. So if they are second degree but defile the hands, then why shouldn't a hand that is second degree defile another hand on the same person, which is second degree? They said to him, the laws of the Torah may not be argued from the laws of the scribes, nor may the laws of the scribes be argued from the laws of the Torah, nor may the laws of the scribes be argued from other laws of the scribes. So they are trying to say here in the clearest language they can muster that we can't learn a rule from we can't learn how to apply a rule of the sages, the laws of the scribes, from a rule of the Torah, that they are not going to always follow the same logic, that we cannot deduce the conclusion of a rabbinic argument over a rabbinic law from a position that the Torah takes. Because if it's a Torah law, then we follow the normal logic of Torah. But if it is a rabbinic law, it has its own logic. It is playing by its own rules, as I've sort of tried to say over and over, and here we have it in very black and white. And likewise, you can make suggestions about applications in tricky situations by looking at different rabbinic rules and comparing them to other rabbinic rules, but you can't actually make a categorical claim that because the rules of Netilat Yadayim are like this, that the rules of lighting the Hanukkah candles are like that they are two separate rabbinic decrees, and as such, they can follow their own independent logic. Now, there might be overlap, and indeed, very often the rabbis do use very similar logic from one edict to another, but you cannot make a hard and fast rule. And likewise, you cannot make a determination of a rabbinic issue from a Torah issue. And very importantly, you cannot interpret Torah based upon a rabbinic issue. You can't go the other direction either. That within their own bubble, they make sense. Outside their bubble, they may not make sense compared to other things.
So,
Now,
Rabbi,
I know that feels weird and almost uncomfortable, because shouldn't it all be one giant unified, perfectly holistic legal system? And well, the Torah is, and the rabbinic understanding of the Torah is, the Torah Sheba al Peh. But that's something that we have pages and pages of Mishnah and Midrash Halacha, and especially the Talmud, to try and reconcile all of the Torah understanding, because it has to fit together. But once you're outside of the Torah itself and only into pure rabbinic positions, what they're calling here these divrei sofrim, the words of the sages, of the scribes, then that is a realm unto itself. Yes, Eric.
so then by argue, they're not really talking about argue. They're using the word argue to mean deduce.
Well, I mean, in a modern terminology, I guess you could say yes. But if, in a strict sense, argued here always should mean that you are trying to prove a point, not suggest an interpretation, but prove a point. And you can't prove it from outside the bubble. You can suggest, you can imply, you can make I'm trying to think of the right soft language. It's not even a claim, but just an interpretive hint from outside and in, but it doesn't hold any weight. I guess you'd almost say, like, if something was normal in the law of Spain, that doesn't mean I should be able to use it to prove a position of the law of Brazil. Are they likely to be similar? Sure, probably in many things they might be, but I can't get up in front of a Brazilian court and say, drawing from the law of Spain, and expect them to listen to my argument.
Maybe for Portugal, not Spain, by the way.
Yes, I deliberately did not choose Portugal because of Portugal and Brazil. And indeed, Brazil, like America, might sometimes give a hint back towards British law. And of course, someday we can talk about the interesting modern Israeli law, the secular law, which draws from the Turkish time, which draws from the British time, which draws from rabbinic ideas and its own interpretations. It's fascinating. But this is saying you can be inspired, but you're not going to make your conclusive argument.
And Rabbi, is this the Mishnah that creates that rule?
No, this is the Mishnah that's pointing out a rule that they thought was obvious.
All right. Oh, was that rule pointed out before this or no?
Well, it's really hard to get before and after. Remember, the Mishnah wasn't written, Brachot, chapter 1, Mishnah 1, on the first day, and then it went from there. The Mishnah was always being compiled, discussed, reformulated in terms of language and terminology ever since Mount Sinai. So you can't really put any one page of Mishnah earlier than the other, except for the fact in general that we know that the Yadayim is relatively late. This does not go all the way back to Sinai. This definitely was a later decision. And we're going to talk about that in just a bit. I think we'll get to it tonight. All right, Mishnah 3:3. The straps of the tefillin, when connected with the tefillin boxes, defile the hands. Rabbi Shimon says the straps of the tefillin do not defile the hands. What's going on here? Well, our tefillin on our head and on our arm, what do they have inside of them? Sifrei Kodesh. They have tiny little writings of the Torah. And so as such, those writings will Yadayim, they will make your hands ritually impure. So the tefillin, that's obvious. They have the writings inside. Of course, if I touch them, my hands have touch the writings, I am ritually impure in my hands. But the straps, do they count as part of the box, or do they count as being separate from the box? If they are part of the box, then they will convey the impurity. If they are not considered part of the box, then they will not convey the impurity. The sages say they are part of the box, right? Tefillin aren't tefillin unless they actually have the straps. Therefore, touching the straps is like touching the box, which is like touching the scrolls inside them. Your hands are ritually impure. Do netilat yadayim. And Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Rabbi Shimon loses this argument. This is one very important reason of why you not only wrap up your tefillin to protect them, but you're also wrapping them up to keep them from constantly defiling your hands. Keep them, in a nice little bag. More on our unusual writing systems.
So in theory, after doing shacharit, we should do netilat yadayim to clean the hand from the tefillin.
Well, if you're planning to eat something that requires netilat yadayim, if you're just eating a banana, no problem. The rabbis didn't say you have to do netilat yadayim before any eating. Yes, before truma, obviously, but truma is not an issue right now. And obviously, before you eat anything like from the altar, from the temple. But nowadays, we only are required to do netilat yadayim for our lechem meals, the meals with motzi. So if you're just having a shehakol candy bar, just eating, a regular food that doesn't require a motzi, it's not establishing a meal, then technically, no, you don't have to do netilat yadayim. Your hands can be as ritually impure as you want and enjoy your apple. But when you set a meal and you do motzi, then yes, you have to do netilat yadayim.
But if the rabbis say that the sages that bring a truma, that tefillin, so therefore the solution, you say the solution is to the netilat yadayim after finishing with the tefillin.
Exactly. If you are going to eat a truma banana, a banana that was given to you as truma, and you're a kohen, or if you are going to take a banana and give it to the kohen, and you want to make sure that it'll be truma and ritually pure, then after you finished with your tefillin, you would need to do netilat yadayim. Yes.
So for us today, it's not relevant either.
For us today, it's not really relevant as long as you're not just going straight into breakfast with bread or something. And if you are, then you should be doing netilat yadayim anyway. Even if you didn't have tefillin, like, if it was a Shabbat or a Yom Tov where you weren't wearing tefillin.
Thank you.
Mishnah 4. The margin on a scroll, which is above or below at the beginning or at the end, defiles the hands. Okay, so you are writing out a scroll. You're writing out the book of Bereshit, you're writing out the book of Yehoshua, whatever book of the Bible you are writing, there is a part above the words, there's a part below the words, there's a part before the words, that's empty, and there's a part after the words, that's empty, right? The margins. Do those also ritually defile your hands? You betcha. Yes, they do, right? It's not only the cloth with the writing on it, just that, like those square inches. The entirety of the book, the scroll, will also cause ritual impurity. Now, Rabbi Yehuda disagrees on this. Rabbi Yehuda says the margins at the end does not render unclean the hands until a handle is fastened to it. Now, Rabbi Yehuda's opinion about this is because the end of a scroll, the part that you have not written on, but you've already finished writing, well, that may not actually be part of the scroll. It might just be cut off because it's the extra bit of the parchment. Once you put a handle on it, the roller, then yeah, of course, it's part of the parchment and the entirety becomes potential for ritual impurity. But otherwise, it's not. Now, the sages disagree because the end is actually a very important part of covering the entirety of the scroll to provide a protective cover. But that was his opinion.
Is there a chance the scroll might not end up without a handle?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is unusual to have a modern scroll like that. But for example, a mezuzah or a tefillin scroll definitely do not have handles. And while it is the norm, advisable, and the proper way to do it, to have a handle for a Megillat Esther, for the scroll for Purim, if you had a kosher scroll without a handle, it's still a kosher scroll.
So Judah loses then, right?
Judah loses. All right, but what counts as a scroll? What counts, as we're going to see, as Sifrei Kodesh, as a book of the Bible? The first part here is a fascinating one, but the second half is, I think, where we're going to have a lot of fun. A scroll on which the writing has become erased and 85 letters remain, as many are as in the section, and it came to pass when the ark set forward, Vayahi bin Soa Haaron, right? That whole section there, this defiles the hands. Likewise, a single sheet on which there are written 85 letters, as many are as in the section, and it came to pass when the ark moved forward, defiles the hands. So if you want to talk about how much do I have to write, which actually counts as being a section, as being text, before it triggers the ritual impurity precautions, it's 85 letters. Now, why did they pick this section from Bamidbar? Well, because if you are familiar with this section, it is set apart by these little reverse nuns, these little brackets. And there are many traditions that say this should be considered its own book of the Torah, that you have Genesis, Leviticus, Numbers part 1, this portion, Numbers part 2, and then the book of Devarim, which would give us 7 books total of the Torah rather than only 5. So this kind of became a benchmark, 85 words or less, and it doesn't, 84 words or less, and it doesn't trigger the precaution, 85 or more. Well, that is the smallest section that is a section of Torah or a section of the Tanakh that counts as its own book. And therefore 85 words, that becomes enough. And now it triggers the precaution. Okay.
85 letters, right?
85 letters, yes, sorry. All the holy scriptures defile the hands. All right, that's very clear, right? All of the Sifrei Kodesh, which means all of the Tanakh, all of what we call the Bible, what some people call the Old Testament, but we don't. Those all are considered holy. Now, very important to remember, we're talking here about the actual klaf, the scroll. So an Eitz Chaim Chumash, the printed book version, those do not cause the hands to be defiled, only if they are written on a proper scroll. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim, and Kohelet defile the hands. Wait, what? Why are we talking about Shir HaShirim and Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes? Why are we talking about them differently than the others? Well, because there is a little bit of a discussion on this point. Rabbi Yehuda says the Song of Songs defiles the hands, but there is a dispute about Kohelet. Rabbi Yossi says Kohelet does not defile the hands, but there is a dispute about the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim. All right, so we've got 2 different memories of the issue. Rabbi Yehuda's opinion is that Song of Songs, stamp of approval, definitely part of the Tanakh. But Kohelet, the book of Ecclesiastes, some people say that is divinely written. Other people say that it was Kohelet's own words. And, it's more like the words of Ben Sira, which was a book written, or the book of Maccabees, that was written with the best of intentions and with knowledge, but should not be considered kadosh, that should not be considered holy. And that is an argument, he says. Rabbi Yossi says, no. Kohelet does not defile the hands. He is saying 100% it is not part of the Bible. But Shir HaShirim, that's where there's a maybe. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. Now, Rabbi Shimon brings in a little bit more. The ruling about Kohelet is one of the leniencies of Beit Shammai and one of the stringencies of Beit Hillel, where Beit Shammai would say, don't worry about Kohelet, and Beit Hillel says, you have to worry about Kohelet. Now you can see that this is an interesting definition of stringent versus leniency. Here the definition would be that Beit Shammai is saying it's lenient if we are making the book not vulnerable to this ritual impurity precaution, and it's strict if you're making it eligible for the precaution. But you could also say that they are being strict about what comes into the canon, what is accepted as being a holy book, and what is not accepted as being a holy book. Rabbi Shimon ben Azai said, I have received a tradition from 72 elders on the day when they appointed Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah head of the academy, that the Song of Songs and Kohelet defile the hands. All right. When Shimon ben Azai steps in and goes, wait. Look, guys, I have heard from 72 elders, which is basically saying nobody disagrees about this, that on the day when Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was made the head of the Beit Midrash, it was agreed that Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim, and Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, both count as being part of the Bible. They are both Sifrei Kodesh. They both defile the hands. Now, what is this day of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah? Well, you may remember Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Yoshua were often getting into trouble and arguments. Well, more specifically, Rabban Gamliel was constantly embarrassing Rabbi Yoshua. And when he had finally embarrassed him too much, that's when the rest of the Beit Midrash said, Rabban Gamliel, you're out. You can no longer be the head of the Sanhedrin because you are embarrassing your colleagues. And they had to appoint a new head, and they appointed Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. They threw open the doors of the Beit Midrash so more people could come in and study. They allowed people to come in and study and more people to participate in the debates and the discussion. And it is believed that they settled every outstanding issue of halakha on that day, because they were able to actually have, well, honestly, a meaningful discussion without Rabban Gamliel bullying his way through the conversation and without trying to force people to always go by his view. Instead, they had a discussion the way the rabbis are supposed to discuss. They voted, they decided, and much of Jewish law was settled on that day. It is a remarkable story about a coup d'etat and revolution within Judaism, and absolutely worthy of a whole lot of other study. But that is the short of it. And Rabbi Shimon ben Azai is saying, and among the many things that were decided that day was Shir HaShirim and Kohelet were officially put into the canon. They are part of the Bible. They are Sifrei Kodesh. They defile the hands. Okay, everybody with me so far? Okay. Rabbi Akiva said, far be it. No man in Israel disputed that the Song of Songs, saying that it does not defile the hands, everybody agreed it was holy. For the whole world is not as worthy as the day on which Song of Songs was given to Israel. For all the writings are holy, but the Song of Songs is the holy of holies. If they had a dispute, they had a dispute only about Kohelet. Now, this is sometimes after the point in discussion. So Rabbi Akiva is just going off his own opinion and logic. And it's like, who could ever doubt that Shir HaShirim would not be officially part of the Bible? It is the most important part of the Bible because, in his opinion, it is an extended metaphor about the love between the people of Israel and God. Now, other people might read it and say that Shir HaShirim seems to be an extended love poem that is talking about the love between a man and a woman. And really, the metaphor in poetry can be a little racy, a little graphic. And maybe that's why someone thought it didn't belong in the Bible. But Rabbi Akiva is like, that's impossible. Who could ever read it and think it was just about, that? Of course, it was only about us and God. Now, Rabbi Yochanan ben Joshua, I see your hand, Aaron, but let me just finish this off. Rabbi Yochanan ben Joshua, the son of the father-in-law of Rabbi Akiva, said, in accordance with the words of Ben Azai, so they disputed, so they reached a decision. So he goes back and says, nope, Shimon ben Azai had it right, that it was decided on that day that Shir HaShirim and Kohelet were officially part of the canon. And Rabbi Akiva, I understand your love for Shir HaShirim, but yeah, some people argued about this. Some people thought that Shir HaShirim did not deserve to be considered an actual book of holiness, even if it is a beautiful, beautiful song. Now is your question, Aaron.
When Rabbi Akiva said Song of Songs were the holiest book, how does he get it to be ahead of the books of Moses?
That's called hyperbole.
All right.
I'm sorry, that one, I can actually give a short answer there. He is exaggerating for effect. He is saying, how could you ever doubt it? If anything is holy, this is holy. Does that mean like if there's a burning building and Shir HaShirim is on your right and the Torah is on your left and you can only grab one of them to get out of the building? Should you grab Shir HaShirim because it is the Holy of Holies? No, you grab the Torah. But that is not what he's talking about. He's not trying to give us a ruling on law about the relative holiness of the books. He is trying to tell us that no one should ever think that Shir HaShirim is only about physical love between a man and a woman. And he is trying to really go above and beyond to make sure we don't get that idea. Now, we didn't talk too much about Kohelet, of why would it be in the maybe position. I mean, I said yes, that some people said it might have been only the words of Kohelet, of King Solomon. But why would we think that? Well, because much of the book of Ecclesiastes is a little skeptical. It is a little irreligious. It's not constantly talking about the mitzvot and the path of following Torah. That only comes very, very late. And it seems to be almost scoffing at many of the basic things we try to do in life to have a good life. Of course, Kohelet in the end brings us through this journey and we settle with a deep appreciation for not only Torah and God, but also for living a good life. But it's a rough read. It doesn't, it's not a simple book to get through. And I could see why they might have thought maybe this shouldn't be considered to be divine. But it is, and it is centered as that.
Rabbi.
In the canon, yes.
Most of Solomon's books were lost, right? Most of them did not get maintained or become any part of canon, right?
Well, most of everything was lost. There are numerous references to different books or different passages that we do not have. Now, using the term lost, I've always had a problem with. One is because as soon as you say it's lost, somebody's out there trying to make a movie about having found it, or trying to sell a book that they believe they discovered it. I mean, the number of people who talk about the lost ark or the lost tribes, it gets crazy. The other reason I believe that we shouldn't use the term lost is because God would not have allowed us to lose part of the Tanakh that God wanted us to have. We know that the prophets wrote and preached much more than we have written down. That, even Isaiah, which is the longest of the books of the prophets, surely said more than what is written down in his lifetime, and gave more prophecy to the community. But what we have is the portion that God wanted to be available for all time. And as such, we are we don't consider the other things they wrote to have been lost. They just didn't make the cut. They were not necessary in the eyes of God to be preserved for all time. Does that mean we wouldn't like to find them? Of course, we'd love to find them. I mean, it'd be great to find all of the other passages and pieces from the other books that were not preserved in Tanakh. But our Tanakh is complete. It is whole and perfect. And we shouldn't think that there was some missing piece. Indeed, in Nitzavim, this very week, as we read in the Torah, don't say the Torah is in heaven, that someone's going to go up and find it for us, or the Torah is across the sea and someone will go find it for us. We've got what God wants us to have.
But Rabbi, don't they attribute hundreds of books to Solomon?
Of course, he was considered to be incredibly wise, at least when he was younger, and wise people wrote and shared a lot of wisdom. Ironically, of course, both Kohelet and Shir HaShirim are attributed to Solomon, along with the book of Mishlei of Proverbs. All right.
Shir HaShirim is also for David. They said that David also wrote many of the Shir HaShirim.
David wrote many of the Tehillim, of the Psalms. But okay. I was under the impression that the tradition says that Shir HaShirim was written by Shlomo, by Solomon. Yeah. But, you know,
yeah, you're right.
I could be mistaken.
You're right. You know, probably you're right.
But David wrote many Shirim in the Psalms, but Shir HaShirim, as the one book, right, is generally thought to be from Solomon. Yes. All right. Now, we're not going to get into chapter 4 today because we've only got 3 minutes left. But I just wanted to show you that we're going to talk about Bayom Hahu, on that day. And what are we talking about? We are talking about that day when they voted that we just talked about in the commentary from Ben Azai, when Rabbi Elazar Ben Azariah was put in as the head of the Beit Midrash. That is the day. And having finished the discussion of Kohelet and Shir HaShirim, we're going to talk about many of the other things that were decided on that day. So it's going to be a bit of a random collection, but we're going to have to wait until the 19th of October to get back to chapter 4. But it's not a long chapter, so after we finish chapter 4, we will start Beitzah.
So you say that Shlomo Melech, he wrote Shir HaShirim, Kohelet, and what was the third one?
Mishlei.
Mishlei. That is very difficult to read because it's just expressions.
Yes, Mishlei should be, as one of my teachers put it, Mishlei should be studied like you were drinking, whiskey or tequila. Little sips.
And be drunk, so maybe something can make sense.
Just piece by piece by piece. Don't just try and drink the bottle. It's you have to enjoy and savor each mouthful. But yes, it's you have to go through it very carefully and unpack it all. All right, well, we are done for tonight, and we are done for 5782. I will see everybody hopefully on Shabbat as well as for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and wish everybody who has taken the time to study through Mishnah wonderful Yasher Koach for the last year, as well as a wonderful Shana Tova. May it be a good new year for you. May it be a year not only of blessing, of parnasa, of sweetness, and all of those things. May it also be a blessing of learning and of growing closer to God and the community. Take care, everyone.
And applying what we learn.
And applying what you learn. That's how it happens. Take care.
Thank you.
Baruch Tiyeh.